We have international affairs analyst Dan Perry joining us, and Brigadier General in the Reserves Israel Relik Shafir, a former commander with the Israeli Air Force. All right, so where do negotiations for a ceasefire stand at this point between Israel and Hezbollah? Obviously, there have been ongoing reports as to what appears to be somewhat of a movement forward and then a step backwards. Give us the latest.
Well, the U.S. is peddling a proposal that we got reports on about 2 days ago, which seems to be very close to the Israeli proposal, minus, we believe, Israel's request for the right to operate inside Lebanon if it deems the agreement to have been violated, something that would clearly be a violation of Lebanese sovereignty. For them to agree to it as part of an agreement seems unlikely. But the proposal would, it appears, I haven't seen it, but it appears based on reports and leaks, to be essentially an implementation of 1701, meaning Hezbollah pulls back from the border, X amount of distance, maybe to north of the Litani River, and the Lebanese armed forces take over the area in the south. Right. Basically, Lebanon enforcing its own sovereignty over its own territory like a normal country.
And Israel would just have to hope and pray, essentially, that that would actually happen, which is unlike what has happened since that resolution was passed initially.
I assess it would happen, and the reason for this is because the support for it in Lebanon is overwhelming, and the government itself is saying they want this. And interestingly, the Lebanese army stayed neutral in this war. Think about that. Israel's bombing Lebanon, according to some reports, indiscriminately and doing terrible things, and Lebanese army is neutral. This is because the body politic in Lebanon wants Israel to succeed against Hezbollah. So they'll probably allow it, but then the question is, will they not start sneaking back in, slowly but surely, within a year or 2 or 3, recreate what they had? It kind of seems unlikely, because if you'll notice the degree of the intensity of what we've seen, both with Hamas and with Hezbollah, far exceeds anything that came prior. And it may be a case, and I say this very cautiously, that the fact that Israel lost all patience and in the eyes of many people went too far has sort of created a shock that will enable some version of quiet for a time. A little bit analogous to what people thought had happened in 2006 when Hezbollah was deterred for maybe 3, 4, 5 years, but then of course they came back.
I'd like to turn to you, Relik. Obviously, today we're seeing reports that for the first time since Israel launched its ground offensive against Hezbollah, forces from the IDF, artillery corps more specifically, have crossed the border and are operating deeper inside southern Lebanon. I mean, at this point, what are their goals? We keep on hearing this number parroted that 80% of Hezbollah's weapons have been destroyed, but we've been seeing very heavy rocket fire over the course of the last 2 weeks from Hezbollah, indicating that perhaps that's not necessarily the case.
Well, it all depends on what is heavily. You're talking about, let's say, 100 to 200 rockets. What we expected before the war started was something closer to 3,000 to 4,000 per day with precision guided munition. Now we're seeing non-precision munition numbers 100 to 200, with the number of casualties in Israel very low.
Dan, I want to turn to you first. Will these proxies be able to act more freely in Syria with the backing of Assad rather than in Iraq, where we know the government is U.S. friendly?
I'm not sure they're going to ask his permission. In a way, there's good news and bad news. It clearly shows that these militias do the bidding of Iran, but it's not a big surprise. I'm slightly impressed by Iraq's steadfast stand. It's not exactly a pro-American government. They're very torn between their dependence on Iran. Remember, it's a Shiite government, basically. So these militias in Iraq have been a destabilizing force. They have badly harmed Iraq's potential to become some version of an Arab democracy. They're somewhat the stepchild of Iran's various proxies. The Houthis and Hezbollah get all the press. In a way, this reflects how badly Hezbollah has been battered, that Iran feels the need to deploy them because they had a version of plausible deniability of these militias. It's very dangerous. If there's thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, in Syria, and we know there's thousands of Houthis that have arrived in Syria as well. They can cause a lot of mayhem, and in particular, the danger is an attempt to attack Israel through Jordan or to destabilize Jordan.
All right, which makes me turn to you, Relik. I mean, what does this reported shift to Syria ultimately mean for Israel's ability to act against these Iranian groups?
Well, it makes it easier, and remember that this area in Syria is no man's land. So being under the auspices of Assad is not exactly the question here. There is a number of players, as we said, the Houthis, the Kurds as well, putting pressure on Iraq. And the fact that Syria is really in no man's land, Assad doesn't control that area, nobody really controls that area. So that allows some leeway for those militias to fire from, but it also gets them as targets closer to Israel and easier to hit them. They don't have infrastructure there and they have to rebuild it. So that puts in question the idea that it's a short-lived initiative because we're getting about 2 months away from the end of the war, more or less, and everybody's shifting gears to hit the most. Now, remember the Kissinger strategy. When you go to the table to negotiate, you fire all you have.
The dispute over the ultra-Orthodox community serving in the military is one of the most contentious in Israel. The Haredi religious and political leadership furiously resists any effort to draft young men. So, all right, Dan, I'm going to turn to you first here because I just kind of want you to break this down for our viewers. Why is this draft so controversial, especially amidst this ongoing war?
Well, the army is missing tens of thousands of soldiers. And as a consequence of that, reservists have been called for duty of 200 days a year and more in the past year. It's completely ridiculous. But this is a longstanding dispute in Israel. The Haredi minority doesn't want to serve in the army. And that might have been tolerable when they were 2%, 4%, 6% of the population. Their argument is that their young men must study Torah dawn to dusk, and that's just all there is to it, and they can't be distracted. And if you want to study computer science, that's a privilege. They have a duty to study Torah. So not everyone in Israel accepts this, but again, if they're a small minority, maybe it can be tolerated. The Haredim currently are about 1/6 of the country. They're having 7 kids apiece. This is not stopping, and they're desperate to have not much attrition. So if they're going to be 1/3 of the country in one generation, a majority in 2 generations, it cannot be that they don't serve in the army, nor much serve in the workforce either. The Haredi men have a very, very low participation rate of around 50%, and a lot of that is make work. So it's a huge problem. The Haredim have control over this coalition. They threaten to bring it down if this goes on.
Right.
Why did Katz do it? Well, the Supreme Court demands it, and he'd be in violation of the law. The Attorney General has made clear she wouldn't defend an effort to flout the Supreme Court in this case. There is no law mandating their exception. They're trying to pass such a law, and Gallant's opposition to it is one reason why he was fired. But mainly for Katz, the fact is, if there's one issue in the public where the Likud position is overwhelmingly unpopular, well, there's a bunch now, but the main one is that they are somehow in cahoots with the Haredim to maintain the scam.
Thank you both for joining us. Really fascinating to hear your takes on this subject. We're out for a quick break. We'll be back shortly.